The Hells Angels biker found the little girl trapped between two cars in a dark lot, and his fury lit up the underground. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin today's story. On a cold, moonless night in a quiet, deserted parking lot, a large Harley-Davidson rumbled down the street, its engine growling with authority. The night was still, the only sounds being the wind and the occasional hum of distant traffic. The biker known as Reaper had just finished a long, exhausting ride. His leather jacket flapped against the breeze as he leaned into the corners, feeling the freedom that only the open road could offer. As he passed through the parking lot, the headlights of his bike illuminated a scene that stopped him dead in his tracks. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, was trapped between two cars, her body wedged awkwardly in the narrow space between them. Her small face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she was struggling to free herself but was unable to move. Her cries were weak, but the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. Reaper's heart skipped a beat. The world of a Hells Angels biker, filled with power, intimidation, and toughness, had never prepared him for a moment like this. His first instinct was to ride away. His whole life had been built around a code. Never show weakness, never get involved with anyone you can't control. But something in the girl's eyes, something that echoed a past he never spoke about, made him stop. He killed the engine and dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel as he approached her. The girl, shivering from the cold and clearly terrified, gasped when she saw him. She recoiled, trying to move away, but the tight space left her with nowhere to go. Reaper knelt beside her, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. The biker's rough exterior, his scarred hands, and his Hells Angels patches only added to the fear in her eyes. But Reaper wasn't like the other men she had feared. Without a word, he gently placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her without speaking. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man known for his fierceness. The girl's trembling voice broke the silence. "Please, help me." Reaper's chest tightened at the sound of her plea. He could see she was in pain, and her desperation stirred something inside him, a long-buried feeling, one he had tried to lock away for years. He carefully moved the cars apart, using his strength to create just enough space to pull her free. The girl winced as she shifted, but the pain in her face was nothing compared to the relief she felt once she was out. Reaper gently helped her to her feet, his hands steady despite the situation. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice rough but filled with concern. The girl nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she couldn't speak. Reaper's heart was heavy as he looked at her. What kind of world was this, where a child was left in such a condition? What had brought her to this dark, forgotten lot? But there was no time for questions. He knew he had to get her help, and fast. The biker's mind raced. He couldn't just leave her here. Not after everything he had seen in his life. This was different. This was real. With no hesitation, he picked her up gently and carried her to his bike. His large, calloused hands cradled her carefully as he placed her in front of him on the bike. The girl clung to him, her tiny hands gripping his jacket tightly. "We're getting you to safety," Reaper muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. He revved the engine and sped off, the rumble of his bike filling the air. As they sped through the streets, the wind in their faces, Reaper's mind was clouded with thoughts of the girl. She had no one, no place to go, and no way of protecting herself. His anger began to build, a fury that had been dormant for too long. What kind of monster would leave a child like this? The more he thought about it, the more his anger consumed him. He wasn't just going to take her to a hospital. No, this was more than that. This was about justice. This was about revenge. The underground world Reaper lived in was filled with danger, but it also held power. Power he could use to make things right. He wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let this go. He would make sure the people responsible for putting this child in danger paid the price. Reaper's mind was set. His fury was about to ignite a chain of events that would rock the underground world to its core. Igniting the engine, Reaper's bike roared down the empty highway, the cold night air biting at his face as he sped through the streets. The girl was still gripping him tightly, her small body pressed against his chest. Her presence was a stark contrast to the rough, hard life he had led. She was fragile, vulnerable, a child caught in a world that didn't care. The thought weighed heavily on him as he navigated the streets, trying to make sense of everything. His mind was a storm of emotions, anger swirling with something he hadn't felt in years, compassion. The girl's safety was all that mattered now, and the anger that had built inside him ever since he found her trapped between the cars only intensified. His hands gripped the handlebars of the bike with determination, his thoughts racing. He needed to get her to safety. No more delays. No more fear. They couldn't afford to stop. The world outside was harsh, and tonight, Reaper wasn't about to let that world win. He needed to protect this girl, and that meant doing whatever it took. He wasn't sure what kind of danger they were running from, but he could feel it in the air. The feeling of being hunted, of being watched, was something that ran deep within him. He'd lived it, and now, it was coming for them. The more he thought about it, the more his rage grew. Who would leave a child in the dark like that? Who would hurt someone so innocent? He had to make them pay. Reaper's grip tightened, and the fury that had been bubbling up since he first laid eyes on the girl finally erupted. The world of Hell's Angels was a ruthless one, and he was part of it, but this was different. This was personal. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt her. As the lights of the city blurred past, Reaper pushed the bike faster, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had a few places in mind, places where he could find the answers, places where he could make sure this never happened again. The girl shifted behind him, her small voice breaking through the chaos of his thoughts. "Are we safe now?" she whispered. Reaper's heart tightened. She had no idea. No idea what kind of world she was in, no idea what kind of world he was in. He wished he could give her the answer she wanted. He wished he could promise her safety, but he couldn't. "Not yet. We're almost there," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. They reached the outskirts of town, and Reaper turned off the main road, heading toward a secluded area, his bike skimming over the rough terrain. It was a place that not many knew about, a place where he could regroup and figure out what to do next. The girl had fallen silent, her small body still pressed against him. She was exhausted, and so was he. They pulled into the hidden parking lot, surrounded by trees that kept the world away. Reaper killed the engine and dismounted, carefully lifting the girl off the bike and setting her down on her feet. She wobbled for a moment before steadying herself. Her eyes were filled with gratitude, but there was something else there too, fear. Reaper could see it in the way she looked around, the way she held herself. She wasn't just scared of the world, she was scared of him. The biker, the man who had just rescued her, but was still a stranger to her. Reaper felt a twinge of guilt. "I won't hurt you," he said, his voice softer now, trying to reassure her. She nodded, but her eyes stayed wary. He couldn't blame her. He was a Hell's Angels biker, ruthless, dangerous, feared. But for the first time in a long while, he wished he wasn't. He wished he could be the kind of man she needed. The kind of man who could offer her a future free of fear. But that wasn't the reality. Not in his world. "Let's get you inside," he said, leading her to a nearby cabin that he used as a safe house. It was small, worn, but it had everything they needed for now. The inside was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a single bulb hanging overhead. The girl sat on the couch, still clutching his jacket as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Reaper watched her for a moment, his thoughts racing. He had to figure out what to do next. The girl's safety was the priority, but there were other things he couldn't ignore. Who had put her in that parking lot? Who had abandoned her? And why had he felt this pull to protect her? He didn't have answers, but he would find them. He had to. The sound of motorcycles approaching broke his concentration, and Reaper's body stiffened. He knew that sound. The unmistakable rumble of Hell's Angels bikes. His brothers. They were coming. And they wouldn't be happy to see him with the girl. Reaper stood, his heart racing as he moved toward the door. He couldn't let them find her. Not yet. Not before he had answers. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low, filled with authority. The girl nodded, her wide eyes filled with uncertainty. Reaper grabbed his jacket, his fists clenched in anger. This was far from over. The storm was just beginning. and he was about to bring the fury of hell's angels down on whoever was responsible for putting this girl in danger. The roar of the engines grew louder as Reaper stood by the door, his hands clenched into fists. His heart raced. His brothers were approaching, and the feeling of impending danger sent a shiver down his spine. The sound of the bikes grew closer, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. He knew them well. The men who wore the same patches, who lived by the same code, who would never understand what he was doing. He couldn't afford to let them find out about the girl. Not yet. Not before he had answers. Not before he figured out who had put her in that lot and why. He quickly turned to the girl, who was sitting on the couch, her eyes wide with uncertainty. She had no idea what was about to happen. He could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, a spark of hope. Maybe it was the way he had taken care of her, the way he had gotten her to safety. Or maybe it was the simple fact that, for the first time in a long time, someone was looking out for her. Reaper's heart clenched as he looked at her. She was just a kid, no older than 10, and yet she had already seen more of the world's darkness than anyone should ever have to. "Stay here," he told her again, his voice firm but not unkind. She nodded silently, watching him as he walked toward the window. He could see the headlights of the bikes approaching in the distance, their powerful beams cutting through the night. Reaper took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The brothers would be here any minute. He knew they would ask questions. He knew they would want to know why he had brought her here. And he knew, deep down, that they wouldn't like his answer. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let them take her from him. He couldn't. Reaper turned to the girl one last time before he stepped outside. "I'll be back," he said quietly. "Stay inside and lock the door." She didn't say anything, but her wide eyes followed him as he stepped into the cold night. The sound of the bikes was now deafening, and as the riders pulled into the lot, Reaper felt his pulse quicken. He recognized each of them. There was Steele, the president of the Redwood chapter, with his intimidating presence and deep voice. Then there was Viper, a former soldier with a temper that was as short as his fuse. And of course, there was Jackal, the club's enforcer, who had a knack for making people disappear. Reaper's jaw tightened as they dismounted their bikes, their boots hitting the ground with authority. Steele was the first to speak, his voice gruff and commanding. "What the hell's going on, Reaper?" he asked, his eyes scanning the area. "I don't know what you're talking about," Reaper replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "You know what we're talking about," Viper chimed in, crossing his arms over his chest. "You bring a kid here, Reaper? What the hell's wrong with you?" Reaper stood tall, his stance unwavering. "She's not a threat. She needed help." Steele raised an eyebrow. "Help? From you?" Reaper didn't back down. "Yes. I'm not the person you think I am, Steele." Jackal stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You know the rules, Reaper. You don't bring anyone into the fold unless they're one of us." "I didn't bring her here to make her part of the club," Reaper shot back. "I brought her here because she was alone, scared, and in trouble." The tension in the air was thick, but Steele held up a hand, signaling for the others to stand down. He looked at Reaper for a long moment before speaking again. "What happened to her?" Reaper hesitated for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the cabin. "I found her in a parking lot, trapped between two cars. She was scared. She needed help." The others exchanged glances, clearly not convinced. Viper spoke again, his voice tinged with suspicion. "And you just decided to help her? No questions asked." "No questions asked," Reaper replied, his voice firm. "She's just a kid." For a moment, there was silence. Then Steele let out a deep sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're playing a dangerous game, Reaper. You're breaking the rules." "I know," Reaper said quietly. "But sometimes, the rules don't matter." Steele studied him for a moment, his eyes sharp. "You need to figure this out, Reaper. This isn't just about you. It's about the whole club." Reaper nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll deal with it." The sound of footsteps behind him caught his attention. The girl had come outside, standing in the doorway, her small form silhouetted against the dim light inside. Reaper's heart clenched when he saw her. "It's okay," he said, his voice softening as he turned to face her. The girl stepped forward cautiously, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice trembling. Reaper looked back at his brothers, who were now standing quietly, watching the girl with curious eyes. "They're my friends," he said. "They're here to help too." The girl didn't look convinced, but she stepped closer to Reaper, still holding tightly to his jacket. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was something else too. Something that Reaper hadn't expected. Hope. It was faint, but it was there. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he was going to make sure that hope didn't die. The cold wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the cabin as Reaper stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the horizon. The girl was inside, sitting quietly on the couch, her small form barely noticeable in the dim light. The brothers were still here, their motorcycles parked outside, their presence a constant reminder of the world Reaper had once been a part of, a world that now seemed distant, disconnected from the life he was trying to protect. Steel, Viper, and Jackal were seated around the room, watching him with quiet suspicion. They didn't understand. They couldn't. Hell's Angels didn't get involved with innocent civilians. They didn't take in children. They didn't do what Reaper had just done. Reaper turned to face them, his expression hardening. "She stays here," he said, his voice low and steady. "Until we figure out who did this and why, she stays with me." Steel narrowed his eyes. "You don't get it. Do you, Reaper?" he said, his tone clipped. "This isn't just about you. It's about the whole damn club. If word gets out that we're protecting a kid, a helpless kid, what do you think will happen? You think the cops won't show up? Or worse, you think the other clubs won't come sniffing around?" Reaper didn't flinch. "Let them come," he said. "I'll handle it. The girl needs protection, and I'm not going to turn my back on her." Viper crossed his arms, studying Reaper closely. "You're playing a dangerous game, brother," he said, his voice low. "You know damn well how things work around here. You're a Hell's Angel, not a damn babysitter." Reaper felt the anger rise within him, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came when he was backed into a corner. But he didn't let it show. He couldn't. "Not now. I'm not a babysitter," he said, his voice calm but unwavering. "I'm a protector. I always have been. And I'll be damned if I let some bastard hurt a kid and walk away like nothing happened." Steele's gaze softened just a fraction, but he didn't let his guard down. "We've all seen shit, Reaper," he said. "We've all been through hell. But this is different. You're talking about involving the club in something we don't understand. You sure you want to go down that road?" Reaper met his eyes, his jaw clenched. "I'm not asking for the club's help," he said. "I'm doing this on my own. But if it comes down to it, I'll take care of it. No one hurts her and gets away with it." There was a long silence in the room, the tension hanging thick in the air. Finally, Steele stood up, his movements slow and deliberate. "You've always been a good soldier, Reaper," he said. "You've always followed the code, even when it cost you. But this is different. You're not just protecting some stranger. You're bringing the past into the present. You're risking everything for someone who doesn't even belong in our world." Reaper didn't back down. "She belongs with me," he said firmly. "And I'll protect her with everything I have." Viper exhaled sharply and looked toward the door. "Fine," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "But don't say we didn't warn you." The room fell silent again, the weight of Reaper's words hanging in the air. He turned to the girl, who was still sitting quietly on the couch, her small hands clasped together in her lap. She hadn't moved since the conversation started. Reaper could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty that came with being caught in a world she didn't understand. But she was safe here, for now. And that was all that mattered. He walked over to her, kneeling down in front of her. "You're safe," he said softly, his voice reassuring. "No one's going to hurt you. I'm here, and I'll keep you safe." The girl nodded, her eyes wide and trusting. For the first time since he found her, Reaper felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had made the right choice. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt her. Not now. Not ever. He stood up, turning back to the brothers who were now standing in the doorway, their expressions unreadable. "I'll find out who did this," Reaper said, his voice steady. "And when I do, they'll pay." The brothers nodded silently, their expressions hardening. "You better be sure, Reaper," Steele said quietly. "Because once you open this door, there's no closing it again." Reaper nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. He didn't know where this would lead, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't stop until he found the answers. And when he did, the world would pay. Reaper turned to the girl one last time, his heart heavy with the promise he had just made. He would keep her safe. He would find the ones who had hurt her, and he would make them regret it. As the wind howled outside and the sounds of the motorcycles faded into the night, Reaper knew that the battle was just beginning. The morning light was just beginning to filter through the cracks in the walls, casting long shadows across the small, dimly lit room. Reaper stood by the window, his eyes scanning the streets outside, his thoughts racing. The girl was still asleep on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket he had found for her. She looked so small, so fragile, and for a moment, Reaper let himself relax, watching the rise and fall of her chest as she slept peacefully. It was the first time in days he had felt anything resembling peace. But it didn't last. His mind kept racing, and the anger that had simmered inside him since he found her trapped between the cars was starting to build again. Who had done this to her? Who had left her alone, scared, and broken in that dark parking lot? He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar rage burn through him. He couldn't let this go. He wouldn't. The sound of a motorcycle engine broke his concentration, and Reaper's body stiffened. He knew that sound. He moved swiftly toward the door, his boots echoing on the old wooden floor. The last thing he needed was for someone to find out about the girl. He had promised her safety, and he would keep that promise no matter what. As he stepped outside, the cool morning air hit him like a slap to the face, the wind tugging at his leather jacket. He could see the figure approaching from a distance, his silhouette recognizable even from this far away. Steele. Reaper's mind flashed to the conversation they had last night. Steele, Viper, and Jackal hadn't been happy about his decision to bring the girl here. They didn't understand. They didn't know what it was like to have a moment like this thrust into your life, to suddenly be responsible for someone who needed you. They didn't know what it felt like to be her, to see her pain, her fear, and to want to do everything in your power to make it go away. Steele's motorcycle came to a stop in front of Reaper, the engine sputtering to a quiet halt. Steele dismounted, his expression as serious as ever. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at Reaper, his eyes piercing. Reaper knew this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. You need to let her go, Reaper, Steele said, his voice low but firm. This isn't our fight. You know the rules. Reaper shook his head, his jaw tightening. I can't do that, Steele. She's just a kid. She needs help. I'm not just going to leave her out there. Steele took a deep breath, clearly frustrated. You think you're the only one who cares about this? You think we don't want to help? But you're dragging us into something that could ruin everything. The club doesn't get involved with civilians. You're putting us all at risk. Reaper's fists clenched, the anger bubbling up again. I'm not asking the club to help, he said, his voice harsh. I'm handling it. But I'm not going to let her suffer because of some code. I won't stand by and let that happen. Steele studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing. You're playing with fire, Reaper, he said, his tone colder now. You've always known the rules, and you've always played by them. But this is different. You're going to put us all in danger, and for what? A kid you don't even know? I know her, Reaper replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. I know her more than you think. I've seen what happens when people get left behind. I've seen what happens when no one steps up to protect them. I won't make that mistake again. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of unspoken words. Steele finally exhaled, his shoulders slumping slightly. I don't agree with you, Reaper, he said quietly. But I can't stop you either. Reaper nodded, his expression hardening. I'm not asking you to stop me, he said. I'm doing this my way. I'll take care of it. Steele met his gaze one last time before turning to leave. Just don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. Reaper didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew what he was doing. And he wasn't going to let anyone, club member or not, tell him otherwise. As Steele's motorcycle roared to life and disappeared down the road, Reaper turned back toward the cabin, his mind already racing with what needed to be done. The girl was still inside, still asleep, still unaware of the storm brewing around them. Reaper knew that it wouldn't be long before trouble found its way to their doorstep. And when it did, he would be ready. He had made a promise to protect her, and he would keep that promise, no matter what the cost. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let anyone take her away from him. Not now. Not ever. The sun was beginning to set as Reaper sat on the porch of the cabin, his mind a storm of thoughts. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The girl was inside, still asleep on the couch, wrapped tightly in the blanket he had found for her. Reaper hadn't left her side since they arrived, and now, as he stared at the darkening sky, He wondered if that was the right thing to do. The situation was spiraling out of control, and every choice he made seemed to bring him deeper into the world he had once tried to escape. The sound of a motorcycle engine in the distance interrupted his thoughts. Reaper tensed, his instincts kicking in. He knew that sound. Another brother. His hand instinctively reached for the knife tucked into his jacket, but he stopped himself. This wasn't a fight he was looking for. Not yet. The bike grew louder, and soon, the rider appeared on the horizon. It was Jackal, the enforcer. Reaper's eyes narrowed as the bike came closer. Jackal was a man who didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He knew how the world worked, and he wasn't afraid of it. As Jackal pulled up and dismounted, Reaper stood up from the porch, his posture tense. Jackal didn't speak immediately, just nodded toward the cabin, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "She inside?" he asked. Reaper nodded, his jaw clenched. "She's safe for now," he replied, his voice low. Jackal studied him for a moment, then gave a short grunt of approval. "You're not thinking this through, Reaper," he said, his tone blunt. "You've always been loyal to the club, but you're risking everything." Reaper's gaze hardened. "I'm not risking anything. I'm doing what's right." Jackal shook his head, his expression unreadable. "Doing what's right for who? For her? Or for you?" Reaper didn't answer immediately. The truth was, he didn't know. All he knew was that when he found her, trapped and alone, something inside him had snapped. He couldn't just walk away from her. Not when she needed him. "I'm not letting her go," Reaper finally said, his voice quiet but unwavering. Jackal sighed, clearly frustrated. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." He paused for a moment, as if weighing his next words. "You know what happens when the club gets involved in things they shouldn't. This could blow up in your face, Reaper. And when it does, don't come crying to us." Reaper stood tall, his eyes meeting Jackal's. "I'm not asking for your help, Jackal. I'm doing this my way." Jackal didn't respond at first, but his eyes told Reaper everything he needed to know. Jackal was loyal to the club, to the code, but he wasn't afraid to walk away if he felt something was wrong. After a long silence, Jackal gave a short nod. "I'll keep my distance," he said, his voice begrudgingly respectful. "But don't think this is going to end well." With that, Jackal mounted his bike and rode off into the distance, leaving Reaper standing in the fading light, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. Reaper stood there for a while, watching Jackal disappear into the night. His mind was racing. Every part of him told him he was doing the right thing, but another part, the part that had learned to survive in this brutal world, kept whispering that he was making a huge mistake. He couldn't stop now. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything he had promised the girl. He turned back toward the cabin, where the girl was still asleep. He stepped inside quietly, making sure not to wake her. She was peaceful for now, but Reaper knew it wouldn't last. The danger was still out there, and it was only a matter of time before it found them. He had to act fast. Reaper moved to the small table by the window and pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in years. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Reaper," the voice said, a note of surprise in the tone. "I thought you were dead." Reaper's jaw tightened. "I'm still breathing," he said, his voice steady. "Listen, I need information. I need to know who's behind this." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You're not talking about some random kid, are you?" the voice asked. Reaper's grip on the phone tightened. "She's not a kid. She's someone who needs help. And if you know anything about it, now's the time to tell me." The voice on the other end hesitated before speaking again. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But you better be careful, Reaper. This isn't something you want to mess with." Reaper ended the call and stood there for a moment, his eyes drifting back to the girl. She was still asleep, still safe, for now. But the clock was ticking, and Reaper knew time was running out. He had to find the people responsible for putting her in danger. And when he did, there would be hell to pay. The wind had picked up by the time Reaper stepped outside, his mind still heavy with the decision he had made. The girl was safe for now, but he could feel the clock ticking. The motorcycle engines that had faded into the distance moments ago still echoed in his ears, and the weight of the club's disapproval lingered like a shadow over him. Steele's warning, Jackal's hesitation, it all gnawed at him. The world he had known for so long, the world that had shaped him into the man he was today, didn't allow for mistakes. And yet, here he was, making one. He had brought a child into his life, a child who had no place in this brutal world, a world where people disappeared, where loyalty meant blood, and where innocence was often lost before it had the chance to bloom. Reaper lit a cigarette, the smoke swirling around him in the cold air as he looked out over the barren landscape. The cabin was quiet now, save for the sound of the girl's steady breathing inside. He wished he could give her the safety she deserved, the kind of life where she wouldn't have to worry about the things he had seen. But that wasn't possible. Not in his world. He took a long drag from the cigarette, his mind racing. The phone call he had made earlier had gone unanswered, and the silence that followed only made him more anxious. The people responsible for putting the girl in danger were out there somewhere, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. Reaper exhaled sharply, flicking the cigarette away as he turned back to the cabin. He couldn't wait any longer. The danger was closing in, and he needed to act. Stepping inside, he found the girl still asleep, her small body curled up on the couch, the blanket he had draped over her now pulled tightly around her. For a moment, he stood there, watching her, wondering what kind of life she had known before she had crossed paths with him. She didn't deserve this. She deserved a chance at a normal life, a life free from fear, from violence. But that wasn't the reality they were in. Reaper moved silently to the small table where his phone rested, his fingers hovering over the screen. The call had to go through. He needed information, needed to know who was behind this, who was pulling the strings. He dialed the number again, his patience wearing thin. The phone rang, once, twice, 3 times before the familiar voice answered. Reaper. The voice growled, sharp and irritated. I told you before, I don't do favors. Reaper didn't hesitate. I need you to dig deeper, he said, his voice low and controlled. I need names. I need to know who's after her. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then the voice spoke again, this time with more caution. You're still on this? You don't know what you're dealing with, Reaper. Reaper's jaw tightened. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for your help. The voice hesitated again, the tension palpable. All right, it finally said, I'll get you what you need. But this better be worth it. Reaper hung up before the man could say anything else, his mind already turning over the new information. The danger was real, and it was closing in fast. He had to get ahead of it, find out who was behind the attack and why they were after a little girl who had no business being in this world. He moved back toward the girl, his hand resting lightly on the back of the couch as he watched her sleep. There was so much he wanted to do for her, so much he wished he could offer. But there was no time for dreams. The storm was coming, and he had to be ready. The club had warned him. His brothers had warned him. But Reaper couldn't turn back now. He had made a choice, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Just as he was about to sit down beside the girl, a knock came at the door, loud and forceful. Reaper's body went rigid, his senses immediately alert. He could feel the adrenaline surge as he crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hand gripping the handle of the door. The last thing he needed was for someone to show up uninvited, especially with the situation as it was. He opened the door to reveal a figure standing in the darkened doorway, their face obscured by the shadows. Reaper, the voice called, low and gravelly. Reaper's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the voice. What the hell do you want? He demanded, his tone sharp. You've made a big mistake, the figure said, stepping into the light. And now you've dragged us all into it. Reaper's blood ran cold. He knew this voice, knew this man. It was someone from his past, someone who had every reason to make Reaper's life hell. And now, he had found them. You shouldn't have gotten involved, Reaper, the man said, his eyes glinting with something dangerous. This is far from over. The storm had arrived. Reaper's fists clenched as he stepped back, ready for whatever was coming next. He couldn't let this man hurt the girl. Not now. Not ever. You're not taking her, Reaper said, his voice low but filled with deadly intent. The man smiled, a dark, twisted grin that sent a chill down Reaper's spine. We'll see about that, he said, and the door slammed shut behind him. The silence was deafening after the door slammed shut. Reaper's heart raced as he stood frozen for a moment, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. He could feel the presence of the man just outside, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. His muscles were tense, every instinct screaming at him to act, but he couldn't afford to make the wrong move. The man who had appeared in the doorway was no stranger to Reaper. He had seen him before, seen the violence in his eyes, the ruthlessness that made him a dangerous adversary. This was someone from Reaper's past, a ghost that had come back to haunt him. And now, it seemed, this man had brought the storm with him. Reaper turned to the girl, still lying on the couch, unaware of the threat that was closing in. He couldn't let her be caught in this. Not after everything. He had promised to protect her, and he wasn't about to break that promise. He moved swiftly to the door, his mind racing. "Stay inside," he told her firmly, his voice low but filled with urgency. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with confusion. She didn't understand the danger, and Reaper hated that. He hated the fact that she had been thrust into this world of violence, into a life she didn't ask for. "What's happening?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Reaper's heart ached as he looked at her, but he knew he couldn't afford to dwell on that now. "I need you to stay here. Lock the door behind me." Without waiting for her response, he stepped out into the cold night air, the heavy sound of his boots echoing in the silence. The man was still there, just outside, waiting. Reaper's senses were heightened, his eyes scanning every shadow for signs of movement. He didn't know how many people the man had brought with him, but he wasn't going to wait around to find out. Reaper's hand went to the knife at his side, his fingers brushing the familiar hilt. The feeling of the steel in his grip gave him a moment of comfort. It was the only thing he trusted in moments like this. He moved toward the back of the cabin, keeping low and quiet, staying in the shadows. He had to get the drop on the man. He couldn't let him get close to the girl. His mind raced as he thought of every possible scenario. The man had come here for a reason, and Reaper wasn't going to let that reason tear everything apart. He had to be smart, strategic. His life had always been about survival, about keeping one step ahead of his enemies. And right now, this man was the enemy. Reaper reached the back of the cabin, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could hear the crunch of footsteps on gravel behind him. The man was getting closer. Reaper waited for the perfect moment, his muscles coiled, ready to spring into action. Then, just as he heard the man's footsteps nearing the back door, Reaper struck. He spun around, his knife flashing in the dim light as he lunged forward. The man barely had time to react before Reaper was upon him, the blade pressed to his throat. "You made a big mistake coming here," Reaper growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man's eyes widened, but he didn't move. He knew better than to make a sound when Reaper was this close. Reaper's grip tightened on the knife, but he didn't press it into the man's skin. Not yet. He wanted answers. "Who are you working for?" Reaper demanded. The man didn't answer at first, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Reaper could feel his pulse racing, his body tense with the weight of the moment. "I won't ask again," Reaper said, his voice low but laced with menace. "Who sent you?" The man swallowed hard, his eyes flicking toward the cabin, then back to Reaper. "You don't get it, do you?" the man said, his voice hoarse. "It's not about her. It's about you. You're the one they want." Reaper's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" he growled, his grip tightening. "Who the hell is after me?" The man's lips twisted into a smirk, and for a moment, Reaper wondered if he was about to lose control and finish what he had started. But then the man spoke again, his voice laced with cold, bitter humor. "You really think you can just walk away from this life? You think they'll let you protect some little girl and not come after you? You're a target now, Reaper. And so is she." Reaper's pulse thundered in his ears, and his mind raced. It wasn't just about the girl. It was about everything he had tried to leave behind. The people he had betrayed, the enemies he had made. The man had just confirmed what Reaper had feared all along. There was no escaping the past. "You're not getting away with this," Reaper snarled, pushing the knife a fraction deeper, just enough to draw a bead of blood. The man flinched, but he didn't break. "You'll see," the man said, his voice barely a whisper. "You'll see who's really pulling the strings." Reaper took a step back, his mind reeling from the revelation. "Who are you working for?" he demanded again, his voice growing more intense. But the man didn't respond. Instead, he just laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that chilled Reaper to the bone. Reaper's frustration boiled over, and in one swift motion, he slammed the man into the wall, pinning him there with his full weight. "I'm done playing games," Reaper said, his voice deadly calm. "Tell me who you're working for, or I'll make you regret it." But the man just smirked again. "It's too late for you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You should have stayed out of it. Now you're just as much a target as she is." Reaper's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of the man's words sank in. It wasn't just about the girl anymore. It was about him. And the clock was ticking. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated everything, was going to make sure that Reaper and the girl paid the price. And Reaper had no choice but to fight back. He wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. Reaper stood still, his grip tightening around the man's collar as the weight of his words settled in. The air between them was thick with tension, every muscle in Reaper's body poised to act. The man's defiant smirk only fueled the anger building inside him. He could feel the frustration bubbling up, his mind racing. But the cryptic words of the man echoed in his ears. You should have stayed out of it. Now you're just as much a target as she is. Who was pulling the strings? Who was behind all of this? And why was it that Reaper, after everything he'd done, was suddenly the target? You're lying, Reaper growled, his voice low and controlled. He wasn't buying the man's cryptic hints. He needed answers, real ones. Tell me who's behind this, now. The man's eyes glinted with something cold, something that sent a chill through Reaper. You'll figure it out soon enough. But by the time you do, it'll be too late. Reaper clenched his teeth, pushing the man harder against the wall. He wanted to break him, to get the answers he needed, but the man wasn't talking. It was clear he wasn't afraid. I'm not going to ask again, Reaper warned, his voice darker now. The man just laughed, the sound low and mocking. It was a laugh that grated on Reaper's nerves. It was a laugh of someone who had nothing left to lose. You think you're the only one who can protect her? You're not the only one who's been watching. Reaper's stomach twisted. What the hell did that mean? His mind spun with the implications. He needed to get the girl to safety, but the world around him was beginning to collapse. And whoever had set this trap was already one step ahead. Reaper's grip on the man's collar loosened just enough for the man to speak again, his voice now laced with something more dangerous. You've been playing by their rules all along, Reaper. You just don't realize it yet. The words stung, and for a moment, Reaper stood there, unsure of what to do next. The man wasn't giving him anything useful, just playing with his mind. He took a deep breath, pushing the anger back down. He needed to think, not act out of rage. Who are you working for? He asked again, his voice steady this time, trying to get a reaction. The man's eyes flickered for just a second, but it was enough. Reaper knew he was getting closer. You'll find out soon enough, the man repeated, this time with an air of finality, his words almost too calm, too calculated. But by the time you do, there won't be anyone left to save. The last words hung in the air, and for a second, Reaper felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He wasn't sure what kind of game the man was playing, but it was clear he wasn't going to talk. Reaper finally released his hold on the man, stepping back, frustration boiling over. Get out of here, Reaper ordered. And don't come back. The man stumbled slightly as he pushed himself off the wall, a sick smile on his lips. You've already made the mistake of trusting the wrong people. You'll regret it, he muttered under his breath before turning and disappearing into the night. Reaper stood there, staring at the empty space the man had just occupied. He didn't know if the man was bluffing or if he had something more up his sleeve. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Reaper moved quickly back inside, locking the door behind him. The girl was still on the couch, her eyes closed, but there was a tension in her posture now. She could feel it, even in her sleep. He wasn't sure how much time they had, but he knew he couldn't stay here much longer. The world outside was closing in, and whoever was after them wasn't going to stop until they had what they wanted. He couldn't let that happen. Reaper grabbed his jacket, pulling it on as he moved toward the small table by the window, his phone in hand. He needed to call in some favors. He wasn't sure who could help him, but he needed every advantage he could get. The clock was ticking. As he dialed the number, he glanced back at the girl, still unaware of the danger creeping closer. She was safe, for now, but Reaper knew that wouldn't last. The call rang a few times before it was answered. Reaper. The voice on the other end was familiar, one he hadn't heard in a long time. It's me, Reaper said, his voice tight. I need help. There's someone after us. The person on the other end was silent for a moment before speaking again, his voice grave. I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, Reaper, but I'm not getting involved unless you tell me who's after you. Reaper ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. I don't know yet. But it's big. Too big. I need information, and I need it fast. The line was silent for a few moments before the voice replied. All right. I'll get you what I can, but you better be ready. If this is as serious as you say, we're going to need backup. Reaper nodded, even though the person on the other end couldn't see him. I'll be ready. He hung up the phone, his mind already working through the next steps. He had to find out who was behind this, who was pulling the strings. And when he did, he would make sure they paid. The girl deserved justice. And Reaper wasn't about to let her become a pawn in someone else's game. The night had fallen heavy, the silence almost suffocating as Reaper sat in the dim light of the cabin, his eyes fixed on the phone in his hand. He had made the call, but there was still no word back. He couldn't afford to wait. The stakes were too high. The girl was still asleep on the couch, her small frame wrapped in a blanket, but Reaper knew it was only a matter of time before everything changed. The danger was closing in, and he wasn't sure how long they could stay hidden. Every time a car passed, every time a shadow crossed the window, his heart would skip a beat, the tension unbearable. He couldn't let his guard down. Not now. Not with her depending on him. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Reaper's heart lurched as he grabbed it, the familiar voice on the other end cutting through the air. Reaper, it's done. I've got some information for you. The voice said, low and urgent. Who's after you? Who's behind this? Reaper's grip tightened around the phone. I don't know yet, but whoever they are, they're playing a game with me. And I'm not losing. There was a pause, followed by a sigh. I'll be honest with you, Reaper. This isn't some small-time operation. Whoever you're up against is well-connected. This goes beyond just you and the girl. Reaper's pulse quickened. What do you mean? The voice hesitated again before responding. This has ties to some pretty powerful people. People who don't like being crossed. You've stirred something up, and now they're coming for you, for both of you. Reaper's mind raced. He had known it was bad, but he hadn't realized just how deep it went. He had always lived on the edge, but this was different. The rules had changed. What's the next step? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. You need to find out who's behind this. You need to go to the source. There's a contact I have. They'll be able to get you the intel you need. But you have to move fast. They're already looking for you. Reaper didn't hesitate. I'm on it. He hung up the phone, his mind already spinning with the possibilities. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He turned to the girl, her small figure still asleep, unaware of the storm that was building around them. He had to protect her. He couldn't let her be caught in the crossfire. With one last glance at her, Reaper grabbed his jacket, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The world he had left behind, the violence, the danger, it was all coming back. But this time, it was different. This time, he had a reason to fight. He stepped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. The street was empty, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. He moved quickly, his steps deliberate, his senses alert. He had no idea who this contact was, but he had no choice but to trust them. The darkness of the night swallowed him as he made his way toward the meeting spot, his thoughts a whirlwind of questions. Who was behind this? And why had they targeted him, of all people? As he walked, the weight of his past seemed to press closer, memories of his time in the club, the choices he had made, the enemies he had left behind. It all came rushing back. And as much as he hated it, he couldn't escape the fact that his past was coming to collect. The further he walked, the more his thoughts darkened. He had tried to leave all of that behind, to start fresh. But now, it was clear, there was no escaping it. His past was tied to this moment, to the danger that was closing in on him and the girl. The streetlights flickered as he reached the meeting spot, an old warehouse tucked away on the outskirts of town. It was quiet, too quiet. Reaper's hand hovered near his weapon, ready for anything. He couldn't afford to be caught off guard. He stepped inside, the air thick with dust and the smell of oil. The shadows seemed to stretch out before him, and he could barely make out the figure waiting for him in the far corner. You Reaper? The figure asked, their voice low and gruff. Reaper nodded. I'm here for answers. The figure didn't move for a moment, studying him closely. Finally, they stepped forward, a file in hand. I've got what you need, they said, handing it over. But you should know, this is bigger than you think. Reaper opened the file, scanning the contents quickly. What he saw made his blood run cold. Names, locations, connections that ran deep into the criminal underworld. This wasn't just about the girl anymore. This was about something much larger, something that threatened everything he had worked to escape. The girl was just the beginning. Who's behind this? Reaper asked, his voice tight. The figure leaned in, their face shadowed in the dim light. I don't know exactly, but these names. They pointed to the list of names in the file. These are people with a lot of power, and they don't take kindly to being crossed. Whatever you've done, it's put a target on your back. And trust me, you won't be the only one thereafter. Reaper's heart pounded. The walls were closing in, and there was nowhere to run. He wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into, but he knew one thing. It was too late to turn back now. He had to protect the girl, and he would stop at nothing to do it. Reaper stood frozen in the dark corner of the warehouse, the file clenched tightly in his hands as the weight of its contents pressed down on him. The names, the connections, the sheer scope of the operation, it was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The girl, the target on his back, and now these powerful people with their deep ties to the underworld. The world he had tried to leave behind was pulling him back, one step at a time, and it seemed like there was no way out. He wasn't just a pawn in someone's game. He was right in the middle of it all. The figure who had given him the file stood silently, watching him closely, waiting for his next move. The tension in the air was palpable. Reaper took a deep breath, his mind racing with the possibilities. Every name in that file was a potential enemy. Every connection a path to something darker. But one thing was clear. The girl was the key. He had to protect her, no matter what it took. What now? Reaper asked, his voice low and controlled. The figure didn't respond immediately, but their eyes flickered toward the door, where the sound of motorcycles in the distance could be heard. Reaper's instincts flared, and he stepped back, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon at his side. Who's coming? Reaper asked, his voice sharp. Friends of yours? The figure shook their head, their expression unreadable. Not exactly, they said, their voice tinged with an edge of warning. But they know who you are. And they know what you've done. They're here for the girl. Reaper's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a random group of people. This was the storm that had been building, the consequences of everything he had tried to escape. The girl wasn't just a victim in this situation. She was the key to something bigger. And now, those with the power to control everything were coming for her. Reaper moved swiftly to the window, his eyes scanning the parking lot below. The motorcycles were closer now, their engines roaring like thunder in the quiet night. He couldn't let them get to her. Not like this. Get her out of here, Reaper said, turning to the figure. Now. The figure nodded, already moving toward the back of the warehouse. Reaper followed, his mind focused on the task at hand. The girl had no idea what she had walked into, no idea how much danger was closing in around her. And he wasn't about to let her get caught in the middle of it. As they reached the back door, Reaper glanced over his shoulder, just in time to see the first of the motorcycles pull into the lot. His grip tightened on his weapon, his body coiled with tension. He had no idea who these people were, but he wasn't going to let them take her. Not without a fight. The figure opened the door, and Reaper stepped outside, his eyes fixed on the motorcycles now lining up in the lot. The riders dismounted, their faces obscured by helmets and dark clothing. But Reaper could feel the weight of their presence, the way they moved with purpose, like hunters on a mission. They weren't here for a casual conversation. Reaper stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with authority. You're not taking her, he said, his words cutting through the tension in the air. The riders paused for a moment, their attention shifting toward him. And who are you? One of them asked, their voice muffled through the helmet. Reaper's gaze hardened. The man who's going to make sure you don't take one more step toward that door. The riders exchanged glances, sizing him up. But Reaper didn't back down. He had no intention of letting them get to the girl. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, one of the riders lunged forward, drawing a weapon from their belt. Reaper's instincts kicked in, and he was already moving, his own weapon out, and aimed at the rider before they could react. The shot rang out, echoing in the still night air. The rider fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. The others hesitated, but Reaper wasn't waiting for them to make up their minds. He moved quickly, knocking another rider to the ground and disarming him in one swift motion. But as he reached for the next, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He gritted his teeth, his hand instinctively going to the wound. He turned just in time to see another rider advancing, a knife in hand. But before the rider could strike, the figure from the warehouse appeared behind him, taking the rider down with a precise hit. Reaper's breath came in short gasps as he looked around at the remaining riders. They were regrouping, But Reaper wasn't finished. He wasn't going to stop until he had taken control of the situation. "Get inside," Reaper said to the figure, his voice urgent. The figure nodded, moving quickly toward the door. Reaper followed, his mind focused on the task at hand. The girl was still inside, and she needed to be safe. He wasn't going to let this world swallow her up, not while he was still breathing. The door slammed shut behind him as they entered the warehouse, and Reaper locked it quickly, his mind racing. He couldn't let the girl be part of this war. He couldn't let her be part of this world. But the moment they crossed paths, everything changed. Reaper looked at the girl, who had now woken up and was standing in the doorway, wide-eyed with fear. She had no idea what was going on, but Reaper knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone take her away. He walked toward her, his steps heavy, his voice gentle but firm. "Stay here, and don't move. I'll take care of this." The girl nodded, her small hands clutching the blanket tighter as she stepped back into the room. Reaper turned back toward the door, his mind set. The battle was far from over. And now, it wasn't just about protecting her. It was about taking down the people who had brought this chaos to his life, and ensuring they would never hurt anyone again. The door slammed shut behind Reaper as he turned toward the girl, who was still standing in the doorway, her wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. She had heard the commotion, the gunfire, the sounds of men falling to the ground. It was impossible for her not to understand that something was wrong, something dangerous. Reaper's chest tightened as he saw the fear in her eyes. He had promised to protect her, but how could he explain the world she had just walked into? How could he protect her when everything around them was falling apart? He took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in his mind. He needed to keep it together, not just for himself, but for her. "You need to stay here," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. He walked toward her, his boots heavy against the floor as he reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'll be back. I need to handle something, but you're safe here. Lock the door behind me." The girl didn't speak, but her small hands trembled as she nodded, her eyes never leaving his. Reaper could see the trust in her, and it made his heart ache. This wasn't the life she deserved. She should have been safe, far away from the violence that was closing in on them. But there was no going back now. He couldn't undo what had already been set in motion. Reaper turned and walked toward the door, his mind focused on the task at hand. The sounds of the bikes outside had quieted, but he knew they weren't done yet. They would be back. He had to stop them, stop whoever was behind this, before it was too late. He opened the door slowly, his eyes scanning the parking lot. The air was thick with tension, but there was no movement, no sign of the riders who had come for the girl. Reaper stepped out into the cool night air, his senses alert. He wasn't sure who was watching, who was waiting, but he could feel the weight of the situation. The world had changed. His past was catching up with him, and the girl, the one person he had sworn to protect, was now right in the middle of it all. He needed to find the source of this, find out who was pulling the strings. His mind raced as he thought back to the file, to the names and the connections. Whoever was behind this wasn't just some low-level criminal. They were powerful, connected, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Reaper moved quietly toward the edge of the lot, where the shadows were thickest. He could hear the sound of distant footsteps, the crunch of gravel underfoot. He crouched low, moving carefully, his hand hovering over the knife at his side. The riders were close, and he wasn't about to give them a chance to catch him off guard. His thoughts were interrupted by a figure stepping out from the shadows. Reaper froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure was tall, dressed in black, their face obscured by a helmet. "You should have stayed out of this, Reaper," the figure said, their voice muffled but clear. Reaper's body tensed, his instincts screaming at him to act. He didn't know who this person was, but they were part of the puzzle, part of the threat that had been hunting him and the girl. "Who the hell are you?" Reaper asked, his voice low and filled with warning. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, they took a step forward, their boots crunching against the gravel. Reaper could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. "It's too late for you," the figure said, their voice dripping with menace. "You've already crossed the line, and now you're going to pay for it." Reaper's mind raced. This wasn't just a random threat. Whoever this was, they were tied to something bigger, something dangerous. He wasn't just a pawn anymore. He was a target. He had been for a long time, and now they were closing in. But Reaper wasn't going to be intimidated. Not now, not when he had so much to lose. I'm not afraid of you, Reaper said, his voice steady as he took a step toward the figure. The tension between them was thick, but the figure didn't flinch. Instead, they reached down and pulled out a gun, aiming it directly at Reaper. Reaper's eyes flicked to the gun, his body coiled, and ready to react. You're making a mistake, the figure said, their tone cold. You've already crossed the line. Now it's time to face the consequences. Reaper's heart raced as he reached for his own weapon, but before he could move, the sound of an engine roared in the distance, interrupting the standoff. The figure turned their head slightly, just enough for Reaper to see the flash of recognition in their eyes. More of your friends? Reaper asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they stepped back into the shadows, disappearing from view. Reaper didn't hesitate. He took the opportunity to move quickly, ducking behind a nearby dumpster for cover. He could hear the sound of the engine growing closer, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Whoever was coming, Reaper wasn't ready to face them head-on. He needed answers, and he needed them now. The girl was still inside, still unaware of the danger that was closing in. He couldn't let her be caught in the middle of this. As the motorcycle came into view, Reaper's heart pounded in his chest. The stakes had just been raised, and he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't just protecting the girl anymore. He was protecting his own life, his own future. And he would fight to the end to make sure they both made it out alive. The roar of the motorcycle engines grew louder as they neared the parking lot, the headlights slicing through the darkness. Reaper stood motionless behind the dumpster, his heart racing as he watched the figures approach. The time for hiding was over. The game had shifted, and now it was time to confront whoever was coming for them. He could feel the weight of the girl's safety on his shoulders, and every instinct in him screamed to protect her at all costs. The bikes skidded to a halt, their engines echoing through the night as the riders dismounted. Reaper's hand rested on the grip of his knife, his body coiled tight and ready for whatever came next. The figures in front of him were wearing the same black leather jackets, their patches unmistakable. They were Hell's Angels, but not the ones he knew. These were strangers, riders sent by someone with far too much power, and they weren't here to talk. Step out, Reaper, one of them called, their voice low and menacing. Reaper didn't move, his eyes scanning their movements, trying to gauge their intentions. I'm not here to make deals, Reaper called back, his voice steady but sharp. If you're looking for a fight, you've got one. The rider who had spoken stepped forward, his eyes cold beneath the helmet. You're a dead man if you keep protecting that girl, he spat. You've crossed the line. There's no turning back now. Reaper's anger flared, but he knew he had to keep his head. He couldn't let these men get to the girl. She's not your problem, he said, his voice low but unwavering. But I am, and I'm not backing down. The tension in the air was thick, crackling like electricity. Reaper could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on him from all sides. The man in front of him raised his hand, signaling to the others to spread out. Reaper's hand never left the hilt of his knife. He wasn't going to let them get close, not this time. You don't know what you're dealing with, the rider warned, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you can keep her safe? You think you're the hero in all this? You're just a pawn in a much bigger game. Reaper's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, his stance firm. I'm not a pawn, he said, his voice quiet but filled with steel. And I don't play by your rules. The riders hesitated for a moment, but the silence didn't last long. The leader made a move toward Reaper, pulling a gun from his waist, the cold steel gleaming under the streetlights. Reaper didn't flinch. He was faster. In one swift motion, he drew his knife and lunged, the blade flashing in the dim light. The rider reacted just in time, stepping back, but not before Reaper's blade caught the side of his jacket. The man grunted in pain, but didn't go down. The others moved in, and the fight erupted into chaos. Reaper's body was a blur of motion, his instincts taking over as he cut through the air, narrowly dodging punches and kicks. He wasn't here to kill, not yet. He just needed to disarm them, to take control of the situation before it escalated any further. The sound of metal against metal rang through the night as Reaper took down one rider, then another. His movements were fluid, calculated, as he fought to protect the girl inside the cabin. The remaining riders hesitated, looking at each other as Reaper stood, panting heavily, covered in sweat and blood. He could see the doubt in their eyes, but he wasn't about to let them back down now. Last chance, Reaper growled. Leave. Now. or you'll regret it. The leader, his face twisted in pain from the wound Reaper had inflicted, exchanged a glance with the others. The tension hung in the air for a moment, thick and oppressive, before the leader finally nodded, signaling for his men to retreat. "This isn't over, Reaper," the leader spat, his voice filled with venom. "You've just made things worse." Reaper didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had made his point. The riders retreated into the shadows, leaving Reaper standing alone in the parking lot, his heart still racing. He turned and walked back to the cabin, his steps heavy, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. He had won this round, but the war was far from over. As he entered the cabin, he found the girl still where he had left her, standing in the doorway, her face a mix of confusion and fear. She had heard everything. Reaper could see the questions in her eyes, the uncertainty, but he didn't know how to explain any of this to her. "Not now. You're safe," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. "You're safe for now." The girl nodded, but Reaper could tell she wasn't convinced. She had seen the violence. She had felt the fear. And no matter how much he tried to shield her from it, she was already part of this world. Reaper turned and walked toward the back of the cabin, his mind racing. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there were still too many unknowns. Who were these people? What did they want with the girl? And why had they targeted him? He couldn't answer those questions yet, but he would. He had no choice. The girl deserved answers. He owed her that much. Reaper stepped into the shadows, preparing for whatever came next. There was no turning back. The storm was here, and he was ready to face it. But this time, he wouldn't be alone.